See you all this morning. Whoops, see, the screen just stopped. There we go. Let's try this again. Stop share one more time. PowerPoint share. Okay, I think we're in business, yes? All right. Welcome everybody. As Joseph said, my name is Katie Davis. I use she, her pronouns, and I do want to start off the session, as I like to do with all of my sessions, by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Diné-Bikéyah, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations, among other groups who are the original stewards of the land that I'm on today. And I am in Poncha Springs. That's where I'm coming to you from. Thinking about today as a casual conversation, as Joseph said, we'll pause for questions. Using Zoom for a webinar is new to me. I've used Zoom for conversations, but I often use GoToMeeting. So make yourselves known in some way. I've got the chat box up. I've got some of your videos up, and we'll make this work for all of us today. And I'm really grateful that you made the time to join me. Enjoy your breakfast or mid-morning snack or coffee. Make sure that if you are chatting in the background, just have your mute button on. That would be really helpful. And as Joseph said, I am more than happy to stay on after the hour for some questions or to follow up on email. And you'll probably see me glancing around looking at my other screen. I've got the presentation over here on my left. I've got my notes in front of me, so I'm kind of toggling between the two. So really quickly about me, because this really isn't about me, it's about fundraising, but for those of you that I don't know, I just came back to Chaffee County. I'm so grateful to be home. After 10 years away, I was in the Pacific Northwest. I have spent my time supporting nonprofits, my career, I guess you would say, doing capacity building work. I am employed by an organization that does capacity building work, and the organization is called TREC, Training Resources for the Environmental Community. I am not here in that capacity today. I'm here as a community member wanting to support all of you. And the resources that I do share today will come from TREC, T-R-E-C. They are open source. They are for public consumption, so you can share those. So I just wanted to make that distinction. I do have a full-time job. I'm not here in that capacity, but thanks to that full-time job, I have free resources to share with everybody today. And let's see what else. I have a background in recreation, tourism, biology, and I'm certified in human resources planning, which sounds boring, but I will say this past year with the pandemic happening, it's been very exciting and a very steep learning curve. Just a moment for 2021. I'm not sure if we can take that collective breath. I think when we're thinking about fundraising, I'm not going to permit that collective breath to happen because there is so much momentum right now and a lot happening, and thinking about fundraising planning, I think, is that real foundational piece to make 2021 maybe not feel as reactive as 2020 was in fundraising, but we definitely want to keep that momentum going. In the chat box, I would love it, and I'll just peek at these. We're not going to talk about them, but if I were to ask you the question of what comes to mind when you think about fundraising planning, when someone says, we're going to do fundraising planning today, what are one or two words that come to mind when you hear that? And I bet for some of you, it's like, oh, what? No way. And for others like me, you might be excited about it. So pop it in the chat box there. And today's agenda. Fundraising, as we know, for those of us that are doing it, is founded on relationship building. And often to build those relationships, you are using strategies. So that could be, a face-to-face donor meeting. It could be that you're hosting an event or you're tabling in front of Safeway. Those are what the strategies are. But oftentimes we end up planning strategies before we get really clear on our what's, what we're trying to accomplish. So when you move strategies in front of planning, this is my argument for fundraising planning, you lose a sense of efficiency. You may stretch your capacity or those of your board and volunteers, and potentially that can lead to burnout. So the focus today I want to spend on primarily fundraising planning. And it's not going to be complex. I promise you that everything that we talk about today, everything, fits on one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So that is my commitment to you all. And the template that I give you at the end of the day will be a one-page fundraising plan. So we're going to talk about why we plan, what the key elements of a fundraising plan are, SMART planning. And for those of you that don't know what SMART planning is, we're just going to really touch high level on what each of those mean. And then a sample plan, and we'll walk through a sample plan. Okay, so first question, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you can just write the number in the chat box. Your fundraising plan for 2021, and there's no judgment here. So let me start by saying that you could be a 4 and it's okay. You could be a 1 and it's okay. But do you have a formal document that has been shared internally with board or staff or key volunteers? Do you have a plan in your head? Do you have one on the back of a napkin or a scrap piece of paper? Or are you kind of thinking, plan? What do we have here? Looks like we have some 4s, some 1s, 1.5, that's great. 2s and 3s, so a nice mix here today on the call. And again, no judgment, it's just an opportunity to kind of get a sense of where you're at right now. So why plan if things are changing? I use the argument like, why take a shower if you're just going to get dirty again? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Why are we going to plan if things are going to change? And 2021, we can all agree things changed really fast and quite dramatically. So a couple reasons for planning. 1, guidance. They guide your development activities. When you plan, you're thinking more long-term towards growth and efficiency. Again, getting away from that, hey, I have got an idea, let's do X, or hey, this person's really excited about doing Y. So it provides guidance and helps you create some guardrails for your fundraising. A second reason that I think of is around strategies, helping you to identify and leverage your opportunities and to think about diversifying funding. Now, diversifying funding doesn't mean that you have equal amounts in equal revenue sources, like you have individual gifts at 25%, grants at 25%, major donors at 25%, fee for service at 25%. It just means that you have a little bit of revenue from a different source coming in, so it helps you to figure out where are those opportunities that we can diversify our revenue. And finally, buy-in. Fundraising is a team sport. All of you are on the call today probably because you are involved in fundraising, but I would hope that each of you, if you paused for a moment and thought, who do I have on the team, could come up with a volunteer, could come up with a board member, could come up with a neighbor who's super passionate about the work that you're doing as well, that you can bounce ideas off of. But thinking about fundraising as a team sport, and when you create a plan, you've got something that's visible that everybody can not only see and be like, okay, this is the direction we're heading, but hopefully they can find their place in that plan, where they fit in fundraising. Okay. So where is the money coming from? This is kind of a pause point. As I mentioned at the beginning, folks, sometimes they want to jump right into strategies because strategies are fun. Like you connect with people, you get to do fun stuff, and money comes in, and that's really great. But I think that it's important to first take a step back and identify and ask yourself a couple what I call big W questions. And I'm going to put them in the chat box in a second. So the first one, and I want you to be thinking about these 2 questions for this next 45 minutes. What are 1 to 2 things that are most important that you want to be paying attention to in 2021 when you're thinking about fundraising? So that could be growing monthly donors, getting more grants, or developing a fee-for-service arm, just for example. Second question, what do you have that you can leverage? So thinking about, okay, what relationships or partnerships do we have? Do we have this amazing database that we spent money on, but we haven't been doing anything with? Or do we have an existing planned giving program that we could dust off and really spend some time focusing 2021 on building up our legacy and planned giving? So again, I'm going to copy those and put them in the chat box. You don't need to answer them in the chat box, but if you feel like sharing and sharing with others because everybody can see your comments, please feel free to do that. So what are 1 to 2 things that are important that we want to pay attention to in 2021 as we're thinking about fundraising, and what do we have in our organization that we can leverage? Okay, we're going to launch into the key elements of a fundraising plan. I think that running through what is included on a plan probably would be helpful. I'm going to do that at a pretty high level. And again, if there are specific questions of like, is this a strategic goal or is this a cultivation strategy, I'm happy to answer those questions. But I'm going to focus on keeping it simple. And as you can see on there, 1 page. I'm going to just drive that home. This is all going to fit on 1 page. So strategic goals, that first bullet there, those aren't your money goals. Those are goals that are strategic. So for example, you may say, you know, we're going to focus on improving board recruitment, and our board members that we recruit, we want them to be prepared to do fundraising in our organization. Or our strategic goal could be, we just spent $500 on this amazing database. We've got all of our data in, the data feels really solid and good. And so we're going to focus on using the data, segmenting it out, and fundraising, leveraging our database and running reports. Or it could be that you're going to focus a strategic goal on helping your organization. If you have maybe 3 staff members or more than that, so that everybody understands their role in fundraising, your strategic goal may be to make fundraising across the organization, part of the organization's culture, what I like to call the culture of philanthropy. So that is what your strategic goals are. The next one would be your financial goals. And so this is the place where you can say, we're going to raise $10,000 in major gifts. The thing here that I want to stress is that you don't want to just raise the bar from the previous year. Especially, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but 2020, with some of the clients that I'm working with, they have blown their goals out of the water in 2020, but it has been because of some weird things happening. So a major donor doubling their gift. Another organization had a couple people who did pass away, but had put the organization in their will, and the organization didn't know about it. So their numbers might look really high for 2020 when they look at their revenue, but these organizations are then going back to their 2019 numbers to see where those were at, to make sure that you're not just arbitrarily saying, we got $20,000 in individual gifts in 2020, I bet we can do $40,000. Also, that ties into being aware of variable funding sources and how reliant you are on them. Next thing, communication and cultivation strategies. So this would be around acknowledgement of gifts and recognition activities. And you could get into the weeds here a little bit, which would move you outside of 1 page, but you, at the very least, spending some time thinking about, okay, individual donors, how are we going to communicate with them this year? And what do we want to do to engage them and cultivate those relationships? Solicitation strategies, next bullet there. That one is, how are you going to ask for money? We've got, as some of you heard as I was talking right at the beginning about Zoom and virtual platforms, folks have been engaged in that way now going on close to a year. And it's important to consider the impact if we move back to face-to-face, who you might be losing, what relationships might start to dissolve. So there may be now a solicitation strategy in there specific around virtual engagement with donors. Assignment of responsibilities. The thing I like to say here is that your name is not on every line. So find your team, whether that's your neighbor, it's a board member, it's a volunteer, could even be kids or grandkids doing some of these strategies as well, carrying them out. So figure out who is doing what, make sure your name is not on every line, and assign the responsibility. And then timetable and monitoring in progress. Really just for timetable, you could be thinking of it in terms of quarters. So first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. You could think about months if you wanted to do a fundraising plan by months, or you know, whatever ends up working for you, trimesters. But make sure that you have a timetable for things, and you'll see on the sample plan what I'm talking about. And then monitoring progress and evaluating performance. What does success look like? Taking some time to think about, okay, if we're going to raise our individual gifts from $5,000 to $10,000 in 2021, and we're going to do that through 4 appeals and 2 phone calls and a couple thank you letters. Who's going to be doing that? When is it going to be done? And if we hit, what number are we considering that strategy successful? So that was a lot to unpack there, but mostly just saying, what does success look like when you are doing X in your fundraising plan? I'm going to just pause there and just look to see if there are any questions, or Joseph, if you've seen anything that has popped up related to that. Okay, we'll keep going here. So before we move to secondary elements, which may take us outside of a one-page fundraising plan, remembering those big W questions as you're creating this plan. So again, what are the 1 to 2 things that are most important you want to pay attention to? And what do you already have in place that you can leverage so that you're not adding more work onto what you're already doing, because everybody is doing so much right now. And so keeping it really simple with those 2 big W questions. Here are 3 more things that you can add into your fundraising plan if you want. These are not as important. You could dig a little deeper into retention and acquisition strategies. And if you are going to do retention and acquisition and even upgrading strategies, how are you going to move donors up the ladder of engagement? I will share out after this session a ladder of engagement tool that you can use. And some of you may have heard of that term, ladder of engagement. It's just a super simple way to put some thought into how you are engaging your donors, you are engaging your volunteers, you are engaging your board members, and visually kind of seeing, you know, how they're moving up that level of engagement. So I'll share a resource for that. Those of you that have a case for support, that might be something that you want to add into your fundraising plan. If you don't have a case for support, that's okay. If you don't know what a case for support is, that's okay. And again, I will share out a resource if you are interested in exploring case for support. And then finally, benchmarks of how you will evaluate your results. This is kind of a deeper dive into your metrics section of the primary elements. What does success look like? This is like the data-driven piece. All right, let's pause and reflect, because I talk a lot. And this second question, how does your organization decide on which fundraising strategies to pursue? And if you are new to fundraising, what's your inclination here? What would you think about? So the first one would be developing a revenue budget, an expense budget, looking at capacity and deciding on strategies. The second is if we have someone who's going to do the work, we do it. And the third is we just like, you know, that sounds like a good idea, let's try it out. Again, with these, no judgment, but I think what I want to share or point out here between the differences between 1, 2, and 3 is that 1 is that more methodical, process-driven fundraising. The second one is taking advantage and leveraging those opportunities that you have. You have somebody passionate about something, and they are willing to do the work, and so you take advantage of that. And then the third would be, you know, we don't really have a plan, we're just throwing it out there and seeing what happens. So in the chat box, 1, 2, or 3. I will say that when I'm volunteering with an organization, I lean toward 2 because I like to be the champion and do it. And then in my work capacity, I support others in thinking through number 1 and how to make it a process. Great. I love seeing the mixture of all three. That's really good. Yeah, there is no one right answer with this. It's just thinking about an opportunity to pause and think about, okay, how are we doing things right now? And is it serving us? So I see some ones, a mixture of all three, a 3, a 2, 3, a couple ones and a few ones and twos. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. SMART goals. And you might also see this as SMART without the E, and I'm going to get into the difference there in just a second. But really quickly, to run through alternate wording, if you're not familiar with SMART, you've got specific. You may also see it as strategic. You have measurable, which you could see somebody calling this kind of what motivates, the motivating. You have attainable, which is achievable. You have relevant, which would be, is this relevant? Is this useful? Is this reasonable or realistic? Timely, is it something that is time-based and efficient? Can we track it? And then the E is equitable, and thinking about, is this fair or impartial? And I'll get into each of these in detail in just a second. But what makes a goal SMART is that it's tied to your, your mission, your vision, and your values. If you do have a strategic plan, or even not a plan, like a formal plan, but as an organization, you know what your strategic priorities are over the next couple of years, the goal, you want to be sure that what you have aligns with that. It can be realized in a set period of time. So it's important, as we just talked about on one of the previous slides, to identify what the period of time is. Is it quarterly? Is it within a month? Is it by the end of 2021? Is it by the end of 2023? So that you can then track your achievements. Clear, concise, and concrete, and making sure that it's measurable. And then explores bias and addresses it in an actionable way. There's unconscious bias, there's conscious bias. We're not going to get into the weeds about that right now, but an example of how this piece around equity and being equitable might show up is, are you asking yourself and answering, who are we targeting for donations and why? Who do we assume has the money as we're thinking about strategies? And who are we inviting to engage? So those are just a few equitable questions. As you're doing fundraising planning and you're figuring out your strategies, that equitable piece is really overlaid everything. So you'll see that during this session, I'll toggle between SMART without an E and SMART with an E, but that E piece, that equitable lens is overlaying everything. So let's look at specific and talk about what this looks like. And I'm just scrolling down, there we go. So specific, be specific, not just about how much money you need overall, but how much you need to raise in each revenue category. So here are some examples. Example 1, we're gonna raise $10,000 for our No Kid Hungry program, $50,000 for our mental health trainers program. We're going to increase major donor giving, $15,000. And another example, we're gonna raise 10% more in individual gifts than 2018. So that's not just saying we're gonna raise more money for our No Kid Hungry program, but really specific, we're gonna raise $10,000. So some of the action steps that you can take so that your goals are specific is to identify what your goals are, clarify them, and then creating that realistic budget that you've done previously so that as you're picking out your goals and your strategies, they can be really specific. And then a couple questions there that you can ask. And again, you'll have these slides. Measurable. So we're going to develop clear ideas of how we're going to reach each monetary goal. We're going to think about metrics and timelines. So good metrics include things like the number of actions we're going to take, the number of donors that we need, and the amount that we need to raise in each giving level, retention rates for existing donors. Those are some measurable things. So here are some examples. We're going to add 100 newsletter signups to our current list of 500 during the next 30 days. That's measurable. So at the end of 30 days or 15 days in, you can look at that and be like, oh, we've only added 10 new newsletter people, and we committed to adding 100. So that's an area that we need to focus our time on in the next 2 weeks. A couple other examples: uploading a set number of social media posts focused on corridors. So that's like outdoor work. You're going to engage folks who engage in advocacy 25% over first quarter 2021 or 2020. We're going to increase our monthly donors 10%. So again, identifying your metrics, tracking this to see where you're at. And tracking could be that you all as an organization commit, okay, every month we're going to pull out our fundraising plan, we're going to look at our goals, and we're going to see, since we said that we identified what success looks like, we're going to take a look and see if we're achieving these goals. So measurable, that's the M. Attainable. So I like this picture because if you have cats, you've probably seen this, or you're doing yoga, right? You've seen cat, cow, but there's that stretch, that stretch that feels really good. There's stretch goals, and then there's unrealistic goals. So for your organization, it's important to take the time to understand what that difference is. What is that stretch, that little bit more than we've done that's going to require more of us? And then what is that arbitrary goal that we've just put out there that realistically we probably aren't going to get to? And so we've just made ourselves fail from the beginning. So for example, I have an example on the slide here. If you raised $5,000 last year in 2020 in individual gifts, and out of that, you had 300 donors. So 300 donors gave $5,000, and you have this great database which has 1,600 supporters in it, and you have said, okay, for 2021, we're going to raise $20,000. Taking a look at that, and that may be a realistic and attainable goal for you all because you have 1,600 supporters, or it could be something that is not attainable at all. So that's what a stretch goal looks like. You've got an amount that came in 2020, you have this potential here, you have this goal that you've decided, I think we can get to that in 2021. So some questions to ask to kind of help inform what those goals are, what you've raised in the past. Another one, what is your capacity? Thinking about staff and board capacity. If you have a fundraising board or if you have a fundraising staff, then you might have more capacity than if it is just you and an all volunteer run organization. Next one is relevant. You've created your realistic budget. You've identified your metrics. You've gotten to know your data. You've stretched a bit, but you've set an attainable goal. And now understanding, does this goal work for us? Is it relevant? And does it align with our strategic goals and mission? Are we reaching who we want to be reaching? So taking a look at those goals that look strategic, measurable, and attainable, and now looking and say, okay, based on what we know, is this relevant? Does this align with our mission and our goals? Is it really reaching out to who we want to be reaching out? So for example, you may be an organization and you're heavily reliant on grants and foundation money. And you may be tempted to be like, oh, I just saw this grant and it's for something new that we're not doing right now, but we should totally do it because then we can get that grant money. So you might be like, shifting a little bit away from your mission, chasing funding. And that's just an opportunity and it may be a great opportunity. Who's to say it's not? But for you to step back and be like, okay, is this relevant to our mission? Is this what we want to be focusing on? It's going to take capacity away from something else. Are we prepared to deal with that? Or perhaps you have someone who comes to you. I know I have been this rather excited board member who would show up and say, oh, I saw this event that this organization did and it was great. And I totally think we should do it and it'll be easy. And so, you've done your fundraising plan and now you're looking at your fundraising plan and this wonderful person who's a champion for your organization comes to you and says, let's do this. And you have that plan. And so you're able to say, okay, is this relevant to our mission? Is it what we want to be focusing on? And if the answer is yes, and you have the capacity and a champion to work on that goal, is there something in that fundraising plan that we're going to take off so that we're not stretching too thin? So it's really important to revisit those strategic goals and mission as you are creating your fundraising plan and thinking through strategies and metrics. Woo! We're just cranking through it here. Here we go. We're going to move into timely. So this one seems simple enough, but this is probably the one where I see falls off the radar the most. So people just get busy, right? You've created this plan, you know what you need to do, you know how much you're going to raise, you get it all out on that one piece of paper, and then you forget to do it, right? Because other things come up, fires come up. So taking some time to be intentional about establishing start and end dates, and they can be, you know, the month of January, the month of March, fourth quarter. They don't have to be January 13th, 2021, but take some time to identify start and end dates. Put some guardrails on that. Post updates. So if you are having your board meetings, I know a lot of us are virtual right now, or even with your staff, you might be virtual. If you're having check-in meetings, why don't you just grab your fundraising plan, pick out 2 or 3 highlights from where you're at right now, and throw those on a slide and share those out with your board and staff. And then check back regularly to see if what you are pursuing still aligns with the timeliness, the time piece. So action steps: establish start and end dates. Take some time to look at it midpoint to check in and see, okay, are we still on track here? And the question to ask is, when will this be completed as you're thinking about your goals and strategies? This is a lot of words on the next slide, but I wanted to walk through an example of a SMART goal. So in this one, a person is writing a brief email to their board and staff about an upcoming event that they've planned. And so there's an event, virtual breakfast. People are going to be in their pajamas, which probably people are in their pajamas a lot these days. They're going to have a follow-up event on the 27th. They want to raise $15,000 to send 15 kids to summer camp in June. Last year, they raised $8,000. So the person is acknowledging this is an aggressive goal. It's almost twice as much as last year. The reason that this director thinks it's doable is because the additional board support that the board has committed to providing throughout planning and execution. They're going to have a raise the paddle, and they're also going to change ticket pricing to a sliding scale and modify raise the paddle amounts. So let's take a look at this briefly and see if it is a SMART goal. There we go. So specific, yes, the goal is $15,000. Remember, they raised $8,000 last year. Specifically, they have said we're going to raise $15,000. Measurable: at the end of those 2 events, October 26th and 27th, they will be able to measure the amount they raised, whether they have $15,000 in their account. Is it attainable? Yes, acknowledging it's ambitious but attainable. And the director makes the case for why, and the case for why was because the board has committed to stepping up and owning the event and taking care of a lot of the planning. Is it relevant? Their strategic priority for the year, and this is an example I just made up, it's not any organization that I work with, but in their plan, they have said we want to introduce 25 new kids to camp. And so this event helps to move them towards that goal by paying for 15 kids of those 25 to go to camp. Is it timely? Pretty efficient. Virtual, 2 days, done. And then is it equitable? One piece that was around equity here is changing the raise the paddle amounts. I don't know if any of you have ever been to events, but I have noticed that raise the paddle amounts could be starting at $25, which is a barrier for some, and so making the raise the paddle amounts less. So maybe there's a $5 raise the paddle. Also providing access to a broader audience, bringing more people to the table by having a sliding scale for ticket prices. So that's an example of a goal that you might come up with. Hey, let's do this event and we want to raise $15,000, and kind of walking through, let's make sure that this goal is smart. This is a slide, and I'll send out a template of this that you can look at with just some questions and an example. So the fundraising goal I put at the top there is to raise at least 10% more from individual gifts from $1 to $250 for a total of $25,000. Noting that last year they raised $22,500. So walking through that goal, again, just a different way of doing it, looking at, is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it attainable? Is it relevant? Is it timely? And then putting that equity lens over your goal to make sure that you are addressing any unconscious or conscious bias that's coming up. So in this example, I put some questions that you could ask in each of those categories. These questions are from the slides that I created. So if you want to just go to one visual and you don't want to look through the whole PowerPoint, this is the one to go to. All right, this is our fundraising plan. So don't get overwhelmed just yet, but we've spent the last 40 minutes asking ourselves big W questions. Those two big W questions: what do we have that we can leverage, and what one to two things do we want to pay attention to in 2021? We've identified our revenue sources. We've figured out what some of our key strategies are going to be in support of our our goals, our annual goals. And now we're going to drop that all into a one-page plan. So this is the template I was talking to you about that is open source, which means it's free and available to all. I will send out the link. It is through the organization that I work for, Trek. And you can get on there and share the link or download a template and start to fill it in. And you actually can change it to make it work for you. But let's walk through this template so that you can see that the primary fundraising plan elements that I talked about do show up here. And I didn't make circles because I thought it would just be too crazy making. So let's walk through. The first column is the strategy. So what are you paying attention to? In this case, foundation grants. The second column is the goal for that strategy. So in this case, we are going to secure at least $100,000 in foundation renewals. The third is the financial goal, was $100,000. The fourth talks about those key action steps, which are the strategies. So what are you going to do to get to that goal of $100,000? Well, we're going to schedule calls with foundation officers to discuss. We're going to offer to meet and discuss each proposal that we submit. We're going to submit our reports to all foundations on time and send the reports within 2 weeks. So those are some key action steps in support of that $100,000 goal in foundation grants. The next column here is who, and that's where your name, if you are the leader or the development person in an organization, should not be on every line. So find who your champions are, find who your support network people are, figure out where the passions are, and line some folks up to support you in your fundraising. The next column is when. So in this case, they've got months down. You could have first quarter, second quarter, by end of year. You could have a specific date. The next column is staff time. And this is just a little bit more into the weeds where you could be thinking about, because technically everyone has 40-hour work weeks, or you have 40 hours in a work week if you're a full-time executive director, for example. And you are managing other people, you are responding to crises, you are engaging with board members, you are supporting volunteers, you are fundraising. Like, that is not your 40 hours. And so taking some time to think through, okay, how much staff time do we think this is going to take? And figuring out if you have the capacity for that. The total staff hours and the non-staff costs are just additional columns that I don't think you need to do. You could actually delete those columns and create more space for key action steps. But what those two are is to put a dollar amount to staff hours, because if staff are, so for example, everyone knows this with events probably, that you raise $25,000 at your year-end gala event. However, if you were to go back and calculate staff time, and then you deduct for other expenses, you actually may see that that event yielded only $5,000, or you actually lost money because you had to pay staff out to be there. So that's just a way that if you want to drop down to another level to understand, okay, how much time are we allocating to this? How much is this going to cost us? It's helpful to do. And I think that is it. So, I mean, if you look at the next column here, new member acquisitions, that's a goal and a strategy, or a strategy and a goal that was identified in this sample. Individual memberships renewals is another, and then major donors. My suggestion to you all is to really try to keep it to one page, because what's helpful is if you keep it to one page, like you may have 15 things you want to do, but if you're looking at those 15, it's sometimes easy to get lost. And so if you even want to do a fundraising plan, okay, first quarter, second quarter 2021, here are 3 goals, here is what we're focusing on. Third quarter, fourth quarter, we're going to bring in a couple more goals, and here's what we're going to be focusing on. So you could overlap a couple plans so that you end up doing a whole lot more during the year, but keep it to 3 to 5 strategies and goals. Any questions on the fundraising plan? Because I think we are I'm at the end. I've got one more slide on next steps, but I do want to pause while I have it up and just see. And if you want to come off mute, please do. Okay. I don't see anything in the chat box. I don't see any hands, so we'll keep going here. Our final slide. So next steps. I always like to end with bullet points for, okay, what can I do right now? And you find the 1 or 2 or 3 that feel like that's reasonable, and I think we can do that. Number 1, hopefully everybody has done in some way, even if it's on the back of a napkin, is your annual budget for 2021, so that you have a better sense of revenue and expenses for your organization, because then that is going to shape your fundraising goals for 2021. So once you have your budget, clarify your fundraising goals for 2021 or your fundraising strategies. So again, on the previous slide, picking your 3 to 5 that you want to focus on for 2021, get those down. Run each of those through a SMART tool. So making sure they're strategic, measurable, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely, and equitable. And that's that Excel spreadsheet that has the questions. So I'll send that out as well, where you can write your goal on the top. There's the questions that you ask for each of those categories, and then you can write your answers. Then create your fundraising plan using the 1-page fundraising template. And again, 1 page, which is really exciting. And then adjusting and updating your fundraising goals as needed. And that's done on an ongoing basis. I recommend quarterly. You don't have to look at them every week or every month, but if you're having quarterly board meetings, like every 3 months, take it out, take it off the shelf, pull it up on screen share, walk through it, and get a sense of where you're at. Have you gone astray in some area? Is there some other opportunity that you really want to pay attention to that's important? Okay, then we need to be, not paying attention to this other thing right now. So take some time to adjust those fundraising goals as needed. And I think that is it. Yeah, that's what I have. I'm open to any questions. I'm going to actually stop sharing so I can see people if they are on. Thank you all for your time. I hope you at least found 1 or 2 things in there that was helpful. And the thing that I let Joseph know, if any of you if you do have a fundraising plan, or if you create that 1-pager and you want to send it to me to look at, I'm happy to take a look at it. I'm not looking to drum up more work. I am employed full-time. As I said at the beginning, I want to support my community and ways that I can, and this is one way that I can. And the other thing is the resources that we share out today, again, will have my organization's logo, Trek. I'm not here in that capacity, but those are free and open to all. So feel free to share those resources beyond to other circles or other organizations, even not in Chaffee County, that you're engaged with. And I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Katie. If anyone has any questions they want to throw out there, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, come off mute or write it in the chat box, either way. And I can go back to a slide if we need to go back to a slide.
What, would you talk more about equity? That seems like a tough component to integrate in fundraising. I understand some development broader, but fundraising, and then the other part of equity is parity, which is a whole different, much longer conversation that we could spend an hour or two on. Yeah. So kind of what's your experience with organizations? Let's talk about it from more of a concrete perspective in terms of how are they practicing that?
Yeah, I would love to talk about examples. I don't want to get into an equity conversation necessarily at this point because it's very big, but the way that I am approaching it in fundraising through examples would be major donor work. Who do you assume has the money? Who have you worked with? What is a major donor in your world? Is it $5,000? Is it $10,000? If you lined 3 people up in front of you without knowing who they are that look different, who would you assume has the money? Thinking about foundations, another one there, which is a huge topic right now. Foundations and donor advised funds, and specifically foundations where they'd only have to give, 5% of their earnings out and distribute those each year. So where are those distributions happening? If they were to double their distributions to 10%, could there be a more equitable distribution to community organizations that may not have a seat at the table? So hopefully those are concrete enough that you understand what I'm talking about rather than getting into the details of equity. I do think it shows up in fundraising, and I think in part, and this is a learning for me, I've been a fundraiser for 20 years, it shows up in that question of who do I assume has the money and what strategies am I employing based on those assumptions. And those are unconscious bias. That's not me being mean. It's not me, not being mean, or it's something that I'm not aware of. And so I think this movement in fundraising away from making it donor centric and moving it toward being more community oriented. And that could also look like partnerships. So an organization who has a funding relationship with a funder, a grantor, has gotten funds every year, $10,000 every year for years, knows of another organization in the community that has the same program or has the same need who hasn't gotten the funding. Could you facilitate a relationship? So that's another place where that could show up. Does that answer, at least in part, through examples, what that might look like and how it shows up in fundraising?
I have to stimulate a few questions on the part of the audience.
Yeah. The thing that I will also say, I'll send a couple other resources out in support of that question, Ed, of like, how does it show up in fundraising, that have been places of learning and opportunities for learning for me as I've been doing my work in diversity, equity, inclusion in fundraising, and how to make fundraising more equitable.
So my only additional comment is, I mean, this shows up in various ways that are not specific to the normal ways that we look at equity. And I have my personal experience as a donor. I find that there is this interesting prejudice that comes into the preconceived notions of donors and donor behavior that limits the amount of donations, in effect, coming out of it on the other end, when the donor behavior isn't the expectation of the organization. It's a loaded statement, but that I think we miss some opportunities because we come in with too many biases about how things should look and be.
Katie, can I ask a question based on that, what Ed just shared? Can you
Sure.
guys hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you have like filter questions? That conversation kind of takes me back to my holistic management training, and I'm wondering if there's like an overlay of filter questions or something that you can use to challenge yourself to see where your bias lays, or if you're, just what you're aware of or what you're not aware of.
Yes, there is, and that question is, the answer is yes, and it's not a checklist. And so there is the community-centric fundraising model has 10 principles that they have created, and this is a group based out of Seattle, people of color that are fundraisers that are bringing their experience to fundraising, and they have a great I won't even call it worksheet, thinking tool that I can share out. It is open source, it's on the internet, and I think that would answer some of your questions of like, are there things that again, if it's unconscious, you're not even thinking about it, and so what is the prompt that helps me think through, oh, is this, what's happening here, or what am I assuming? So yes, I'll send that out. I'll send it to Joseph to send out the link.
Thank you.
Any other questions on fundraising planning and plans?
I'd like to ask a question about the rather nebulous goals. Oftentimes in fundraising, we find we do events and we're trying to increase interest, and then in the future, ownership and membership. Is there a way to track that? Or is it just a feel good? It's increased from year to year? Is there any way to measure that specific event that you're doing to see if it actually is helping?
Yes, and I think it depends on the systems that you have in place. If you have a database, if you can be tracking data and running reports. But what that might look like is if 10 folks attend an event, and then you do subsequent engagement, kind of that ladder of engagement model, where we reach out and say a personal thank you to those 10. And then we send them a sticker, or we send them our annual report, or we send our executive director newsletter. And then we reach out again and say, hello, we've been thinking about you. Our event's coming up next year. Would love for you, or, at the end of the year, would love for you to be part of it. And then they show up at that event again the next year and they give. You've been able to track that through those touches. Okay, they showed up in the door. We engaged here, here, and here. We requested funds from them, or they became a donor here. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. But I would say, like, a lot of times the events, say some of the races that happen for fundraisers, lines, those build community, and there's a ton of people who are involved in it. And you might get a spike, but the long-term benefit of that, because those take a lot of effort to put on.
Yeah.
So it's just that measurement. I mean, from what I've seen, it's mostly kind of a feel. It's like, well, we think it increased this year, and we think it might have increased because of this event, but it just seems kind of wishy-washy.
Well, and it may not be tied to a monetary goal. The goal there may be to increase visibility in our community. And that's a goal in and of itself. And what that looks like is we're going to have X number of people at our events and have these 3 running race events.
Cool.
Where the follow-up happens is then the next goals want to be about converting. One of those goals should be around, okay, how are we going to move people who showed up and raced and said, hey, your organization's great. How are we going to move them into becoming donors, even if it's $5 or $15? And so that's that next line of, okay, individual donors, we're going to do this, 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 and this over the next 12 months. And the group of people that are kind of the pipeline into that individual donor line may be those supporters that you have now gotten in front of.
That helps. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for sharing with us, leading us through this, and for your generous offers of not only sharing all those resources, but also of allowing folks to send you maybe one of their draft SMART fundraising plans and having you throw your eye across that. So thank you very much.
Yep. Yeah, I will. I'll write up an email with the resources and what my offer is, just so that it's clear and you can send that out to folks. And yeah, if there are follow-up questions, I'm happy to shoot off an email and answer any questions as well. And I appreciate your time, and hopefully something in there that was helpful. And thank you. I mean, all of you doing the work. And I mean, I could go on and on about 2020 and what 2021 looks like, but there is acknowledging that the work continues. It is that marathon, not a sprint, and appreciative of everything that you all are doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
You can
Okay.
get an email from me with all these resources from Katie here over the next day or two, and we will see you all soon, hopefully.
Sounds good. Take care.
Thank you, Katie.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.